You will obey!
The war officially ended in 1945, but for 12 German women POWs, a new struggle quietly began beyond the fences. One decision, one loss, and a truth rarely discussed. Watch to understand what survival truly meant. Night inside the camp was never fully dark. It was colder than daytime, quieter, and stretched endlessly, hour after hour, without anyone ever telling them when it would end. These 12 German women POWs no longer had names. Names belonged to people who are expected to return somewhere. Here, they were numbers, metal tags hanging on their chests, heavier than chains, because numbers can be replaced, erased, or lost without consequence. The main woman stood against a damp wooden wall, feeling the cold seep through her clothes and into her bones. She could no longer remember the last time someone said her name out loud. What remained in her was not hope, but clarity. Staying meant dying slowly, quietly, and without witnesses. Rumors moved through the camp like a silent infection. Whispers of transport east, deep into Soviet territory. Places without records, places without return. No one knew if the rumors were true. But in war, women don't have the privilege of waiting for confirmation. Waiting is obedience. And obedience, here, meant disappearance. That night, fog sank low across the ground. Not the romantic kind, but thick, wet, and sharp enough to burn the lungs with every breath. A guard shift changed. Boots struck frozen earth, then faded into distance. For a brief moment, the camp seemed to hold its breath, and all 12 women understood the same thing without speaking. If not now, then never. They all knew the fence. No one talked about it, but they had studied it for months. One weak section, metal worn thin by time and ice. Not an escape route, just a mistake. It wasn't wide enough to crawl through cleanly, only narrow enough for bodies already stripped of weight, shape, and protection. Only narrow enough if you accepted that skin would tear. The main woman was not the strongest, not the bravest, but she understood something the others did not want to say out loud. Turning back was more terrifying than death. The first woman crouched down. No signal, no countdown, just breath held tight in the throat. Metal trembled softly as her body slid through, a sound so small the fog nearly swallowed it. But inside their heads, it exploded like a gunshot. 1 second, that's all it would take. A guard turning his head, a beam of light swinging back, one person panicking. The main woman felt her heart hammer so hard, it seemed ready to betray her. She did not pray. None of them did. If God existed, he had turned away long before this night. She lowered herself. Cold metal cut into her skin. Sharp, precise, painful but unmistakably alive. Her clothing snagged for a single moment. A fraction of time long enough for one thought to surface clearly. If I die here, no one will ever know I tried. Then she was through. One by one, the others followed. No one looked back. No one whispered names. Looking back was weakness. And weakness, here, was lethal. When the last woman passed the fence, the camp remained silent. As if it didn't notice it had just lost 12 lives, it believed it owned forever. On the other side, there was no light, no road, no instructions, only forest. They stood there shaking without maps, food, or direction. Freedom had no shape in their minds. It was simply the idea of being anywhere else. The main woman looked into the black mass of trees ahead. The forest promised nothing, but the camp had already promised too much. She took the first step forward, not because she believed she would survive, but because she knew that going back meant surrendering the last thing that made her human. And as the darkness closed behind them, none of them yet understood the truth. The real cost of freedom was only just beginning. The forest didn't greet them with violence. It greeted them with indifference. Tall trees stood still, neither sheltering nor threatening. There was no dramatic resistance, No sudden danger, only cold, damp ground. Mud clinging to shoes, breathing growing heavier with every step. At first, they moved quickly, not because they were strong, but because they were afraid. Afraid that if they slowed down, the camp would somehow catch up from behind. But the forest didn't need to chase them. It only needed time. By the second day, hunger took on a shape. It was no longer a vague emptiness in the stomach. It became a constant, dull pain, one that slowed thought, dulled judgment, and stripped decisions down to instinct. They found berries along the undergrowth, small red dots against dark green leaves. No one knew if they were poisonous. But hunger doesn't allow careful analysis. The Maine woman held a small handful. The sweetness hit immediately, sharp, intense, almost reassuring. Then it vanished. Too sweet, too fast. A lie told by nature, a promise of life that only extended the hunger instead of ending it. She divided the berries evenly, not out of moral generosity, but because she understood something essential. Once order collapsed, they would no longer be a group, only panicked individuals. Some ate quickly, some chewed slowly, as if stretching the sensation of being alive for a few more seconds. No one said it aloud, but all of them understood the same truth. From this moment on, the body would begin to betray the will. Night fell faster than expected. There was no fire. No one dared light one. Light, here, was an invitation to death. They sat close together, backs against tree trunks, listening to the forest shift. Branches moved, leaves whispered. Then, the howling began. Not one voice, several. The wolves did not cause panic. The terror was quieter than that, slower. What truly frightened them was the realization that they were being pushed closer to the boundary between human and animal, huddled together, holding sticks, gripping stones. They were no different from primitive creatures trying to convince the darkness that they were not prey. The Maine woman felt colder than the night air when a single thought settled in her mind. The greatest danger was not being killed. It was becoming accustomed to living like this. On the third day, one of them fell. Not because of wolves, not because of bullets, just a slip on wet ground, a broken leg, torn skin, blood soaking into the mud. At first, they carried her, taking turns. No one said the words, "Leave her behind." But with every step, the weight grew heavier, not just in muscle, but in meaning. A question formed slowly, invisibly, among them. The Maine woman knew the answer before the question fully existed. She hated herself for knowing, but she also knew she had no right to pretend otherwise. That night, the injured woman burned with fever, eyes open, but no longer seeing. There was no medicine, no bandages, only cold stream water, insufficient for a body already beginning to surrender. The Maine woman sat nearby, enforcing the last form of order they had left. No crying, no shouting, no spreading fear. The thought of leaving her came quickly, too quickly, and that terrified her more than the idea itself. She refused to let the thought linger, because if she examined it long enough, she would find a rational justification. And once she turned away with reason on her side, something inside her would die as well. Death came quietly. No scream, no struggle, just breath stopping, as if the forest had taken what it required. They did not bury the body. There was no strength, only leaves placed gently over her. And a brief stillness, not for mourning, but to confirm that they themselves were still alive. Then, they walked on. No one spoke of the dead woman, not out of cruelty, but because grief requires energy, and they had none left. The Maine woman moved ahead. She no longer thought about freedom. She no longer thought about the camp. Only one cold understanding remained. Survival was no longer a choice. It was inertia. And somewhere along that path, as their bodies continued to break down, while their will held only a fragile outline, they crossed a line without realizing it. They had passed fear. What waited ahead was something far more dangerous. Emptiness. After the death, the forest did not change. Only they did. Morning arrived without announcement. No one said, "It's morning." Light simply slipped through the canopy, pale, cold, indifferent, like everything else now. They stood up, almost at the same time. Not because anyone led them, but because their bodies had learned a new habit. Stand up, then walk without asking why. The main woman felt a strange emptiness in her chest. Not sharp pain, not grief in any recognizable form. It was the feeling of having crossed a boundary and brought nothing back from the other side. She understood that she was carrying something heavier than hunger. Survivor's guilt. Not guilt for leaving someone behind, but guilt for continuing to live. She did not allow herself to remember the dead woman's face, not out of fear, but because memory requires energy, and energy had become a luxury. Every memory was like a small stone, light on its own, heavy enough to slow you down when carried too long. And slowing down here meant never moving forward again. They walked, like shadows. Their steps were no longer guided by will, but by inertia. One foot lifted only because the other had already touched the ground. No one asked how far they had gone. No one asked where they were. Language became unnecessary when there was no hope left to express. The silence between them was not agreement. It was shared exhaustion. The main woman realized, almost casually, that fear had disappeared. Not because she was braver, but because fear requires energy, and that energy was gone. In its place was something colder, harder, the stubborn numbness of someone who has learned that emotion does not save lives. She looked at the others. Their faces were nearly identical now, hollow, dirty, stripped of expression. And in that moment, a truth rose quietly and refused to leave. If they died here, no one would know. No report, no file, no statistic. They would not belong to any victory. They would not even qualify as a loss. The war was over on paper, but for them, it had only changed shape, from barbed wire to forest, from guards to absolute indifference. Women like them were not counted as returned. They were leftovers, excess human matter, after history had already decided who mattered. The main woman did not feel anger. Anger requires a target, and here, there was no one to blame. Only a world that continued to function completely unaffected by whether they lived or died. That realization did not ignite rage. It produced something heavier. Exhaustion. In the afternoon, they reached a thinning in the forest. Not quite a road, just fewer trees, harder ground. A sign so small it could have been meaningless, yet strong enough to shift something inside her. For the first time in days, she did not think, "Keep walking so you don't die." She thought of another possibility, fragile, uncertain, that maybe somewhere beyond the forest, someone might still be able to see them. The thought did not feel like hope. It did not speed up her heart, but it slowed her step, not from weakness, but from awareness returning. She raised her hand to stop the group. No words, only listening. Not wolves, not wind, something else, very far away, very faint, the sound of a world they believed they had already left behind. And in that moment, the main woman understood something with terrifying clarity. If they were rescued, it would not be because they were strong, not because they were brave, but because they had endured long enough to remain visible. Whether that world truly wanted to see them, that was the question she did not dare to answer. They were not rescued in a heroic moment. There were no cheers, no dramatic arrival, no light breaking through the clouds. Only a gray afternoon when the forest opened just enough for an American patrol to see what remained of 11 human beings. The soldiers stopped, not out of emotion but confusion. In front of them were neither enemies nor victories. Just women so thin their ages were impossible to guess, clothes torn and stained, eyes dulled beyond quick reaction. They did not raise their hands. They did not shout. They did not beg. They simply stood there. And in that moment, The Maine woman understood something with absolute clarity. She did not need to be rescued as a victim. She only needed to be seen as a human being, even briefly. She did not cry, not out of pride, but because tears belong to people who still believe they can change the outcome. No one asked how many days they had survived in the forest. No one asked about the woman who died. Those questions were not part of the mission. They were motioned toward the truck, quick, efficient, without ceremony. The gesture carried no cruelty, but it carried no recognition either. It was the movement of objects, not the reception of lives reclaimed from death. On the open truck bed, cold wind cut across their skin. But the Maine woman did not curl inward. This cold was different from the camp, different from the forest. It carried no threat, only motion, only proof that the world continued to exist beyond their suffering. She gripped the metal side of the truck, not to steady herself, but to feel resistance, to confirm that she still occupied physical space. The metal was rough, indifferent, real. No one spoke. They did not need to. The survivors had learned a different language, the language of silence, after everything essential had already been stripped away. They were taken to a reception camp, not a prison, not a home, a holding space where people were reorganized into records, if they qualified for records. The Maine woman sat on a wooden bench, back straight, hands resting on her thighs. No one asked her real name. No one recorded her story. No one requested testimony. Only three things mattered: nationality, medical condition, awaiting repatriation. That was enough. And there, in that sterile simplicity, she understood a truth that was impossible to soften.